The weight of love could be measured in carats, Keisha had learned, and tonight $50,000 worth of diamonds pressed against her throat like a beautiful chain, their fire catching candlelight as Liam's fingers traced her collarbone with the reverence of a man touching something sacred. She closed her eyes and let herself drown in the familiar scent of his cologne, bergamot and cedar, custom blended in a Parisian atelier where they knew his name, but not his net worth. 36 months of marriage, and his touch still made her forget that she had once commanded Goldman Sachs boardrooms with the ruthless precision that had earned her a corner office before 30, and enemies who called her brilliance unfeminine behind closed doors. "Turn around," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. The rooftop terrace of their Manhattan penthouse stretched 60 floors above Central Park, where November wind carried the distant sounds of a city that never learned to sleep. Crystal chandeliers hung from invisible cables, defying gravity and good sense, casting prisms across marble floors that had been quarried in Italy and shipped stone by stone across an ocean. Beyond the glass barriers, Manhattan glittered like scattered jewelry, 8 million lives reduced to pinpricks of light. A violinist stood in the shadows, Magda, whom they'd flown from Vienna because Liam remembered Keisha mentioning her favorite recording of Edith Piaf. The melody of La Vie en Rose drifted through the evening air, hauntingly beautiful in a way that made Keisha's chest tight with the kind of happiness that felt too fragile to last. "Do you remember?" Liam said, settling behind her so she could lean against his chest. "What you ordered on our first date?" She laughed, the sound swallowed by wind and distance. "John Dory with truffle vinaigrette. You told me I had exquisite taste." "I lied." His arms circled her waist, hands spanning the silk of her burgundy gown. "Valentino, because he claimed the color made her skin look like burnished gold." "I had no idea what John Dory was. I just knew that whatever you wanted, I wanted to give you." The memory unfolded between them like a shared secret. The Met Gala charity auction, where she'd represented Goldman Sachs, and he'd been the primary sponsor of an event designed to make Manhattan's elite feel generous while networking over champagne that cost more than most people's rent. She'd been wearing silver marchesa that made her feel dangerous, and when their eyes met across that ballroom full of inherited money and earned power, the world had simply paused. "You bid $1 million on that hideous sculpture," she said, remembering how she'd watched him raise his paddle with the focused intensity of someone bidding on salvation itself. "Worth every penny to spend 5 minutes talking to the most intimidating woman in the room." That should have been her first warning, the casual deployment of life-changing sums of money to solve problems that couldn't actually be bought. But she'd been intoxicated by the attention, by being chosen among women who'd inherited beauty and married into wealth, by a man who could have had anyone, and seemed genuinely surprised by his own good fortune in capturing her interest. Their courtship had been a masterclass in overwhelming force. Private jets to Paris for dinner reservations he'd waited 6 months to secure, weekend trips to Napa Valley because he wanted her to taste wine from vines older than America, flowers that arrived without occasion because Tuesday felt like a day that needed improving. He'd pursued her with the systematic dedication of someone who'd never been denied anything he truly wanted, and she, brilliant, independent, suspicious of everything Keisha Matthews, had fallen like a shooting star, burning up everything she'd been to become something entirely new. The sacrifice had felt like evolution. Her corner office with its view of the Hudson River, the salary that had been her independence and validation, the Soho penthouse she'd furnished with money she'd earned bleeding in rooms full of men who thought women belonged fetching coffee rather than orchestrating mergers. She'd walked away from all of it to become Mrs. Benjamin, to build an empire that would dwarf anything she could achieve alone. "I would do it again," she said now, meaning it bone deep. "Give up everything, all of it. You'll never have to." His voice carried the certainty of someone who'd never learned that the universe didn't owe him happiness. "We have everything now, Keisha. The business, the houses, each other. Nothing can touch this." Dinner had been prepared by Henri, their chef, who'd trained at Le Bernardin and understood that excellence was the minimum acceptable standard in the Benjamin household. 7 courses paired with wines that had been aging in climate-controlled cellars since before she was born, each bite a small symphony of flavors, designed to remind them that they lived in a world where excellence could be purchased if you understood its true price. They ate by candlelight, the city spreading below them like a conquered territory, talking about everything and nothing with the comfortable intimacy of people who'd learned each other's languages. He told her about the quantum computing breakthrough his team had achieved that morning, something about neural networks that would revolutionize artificial intelligence, while she described the new artist she'd discovered for the gallery, a woman whose paintings captured loneliness so precisely they made viewers cry. "James called this afternoon," she said, mentioning their household manager. "The caterers want to confirm numbers for the charity gala. Whatever you think is best." Liam's attention was complete when he looked at her, as if she were the only person who had ever mattered. "You've made that foundation into something I could never have built alone." It was true. The Benjamin Foundation now funded cancer research, educational initiatives, and arts programs across 3 continents. Their joint names carved into marble at hospitals and universities, where their money would save lives and create possibilities long after they were gone. She'd transformed his wealth into legacy, given meaning to numbers that had once been merely theoretical. "Mrs. Benjamin," James appeared with practiced invisibility, a man who'd learned to anticipate their needs before they became conscious thoughts. "Shall I prepare the master suite?" The bedroom was their sanctuary, walls of windows that offered panoramic views of their kingdom, Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than luxury cars, silk curtains that could block out the world when they wanted to pretend nothing existed beyond each other. Liam carried her across the threshold as if they were newlyweds, his lips finding hers with the desperate hunger of someone who still couldn't believe his luck. "Forever," he whispered against her skin as he laid her down, the diamonds around her throat catching moonlight through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Promise me forever, Keisha." "Forever," she breathed back, meaning it with every cell in her body. They made love with the passion of people who still believed happy endings were guaranteed to those who loved hard enough, their bodies moving together in rhythms they'd learned and refined over 36 months of practice. He knew exactly how to touch her, where to kiss her, how to make her forget that she'd ever been anyone other than the woman beneath him, gasping his name like a prayer. Afterward, as he fell asleep with his arm heavy across her waist, Keisha stared out at the city and felt the profound contentment of someone who had won the lottery of love. Their empire stretched around them. Penthouses and vacation homes, private jets and charitable foundations, a life so complete it felt like a work of art. She had no way of knowing that in 4 months and 13 days, a psychology graduate student from Los Angeles would walk through their front door carrying wildflowers and a story designed to destroy everything she believed about trust, love, and the man sleeping peacefully beside her. For now, there was only the weight of diamonds around her throat, the warmth of Liam's body, and the absolute certainty that she was living inside a fairy tale too beautiful to end. Outside their windows, Manhattan never slept, but Keisha Benjamin slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who believed in forever. Chapter 2. Love's Golden Days. 4 Sacred Memories. Memory, Keisha had discovered, was how love survived the ordinary brutalities of time, crystallized moments that proved what they had built together was more than the sum of its expensive parts. The first memory lived in her bones like sunlight made permanent, warming her from the inside whenever October turned cruel and Manhattan's autumn forgot how to be beautiful. It had begun on a Tuesday morning in their second year when Liam appeared in their foyer wearing that particular expression that meant resistance was futile and surrender would be rewarded beyond imagination. "Pack light," he'd said, tossing her passport onto the Italian leather ottoman. "We leave in an hour." "Liam Benjamin, I have 3 meetings today and—" "Cancelled." His green eyes held the mischief that had first made her forget her own name. "I've cleared your calendar for the business of being outrageously in love with my wife." 4 hours later, they'd landed on a private island in Turks and Caicos that didn't appear on commercial maps, where sand looked like powdered pearls and water came in every shade of blue that had ever been named. The villa perched on cliffs overlooking the Caribbean, all white stone and flowing curtains, but they'd barely seen its interior. Instead, they'd spent 7 days acting like teenagers who discovered their bodies for the first time, building sandcastles that waves demolished within hours, racing through surf that tasted of salt and possibility, making love on Egyptian cotton sheets arranged under stars so brilliant they seemed close enough to pluck from the sky. On their 3rd night, as they lay naked on the beach with only starlight for company, Liam had traced constellations on her skin with reverent fingertips. "I used to think stars were just nuclear reactions," he'd murmured, his voice soft as tide pools. "Random accidents of physics happening millions of miles away." "Used to." She turned in his arms, wanting to see his face in the silver light. "Now I know they're love letters. Every single one written by the universe to tell me how lucky I am." They'd made love until dawn, painted the horizon in watercolors, the sound of waves their only witness. And when morning finally arrived, he'd pulled her close and whispered against her hair, "You're my universe, Keisha. Without you, all this wealth is just numbers on papers that don't matter." The second memory was wrapped in the scent of turpentine and dreams made manifest, born from an offhand comment about a small gallery in Soho that had caught her eye during an afternoon walk. She'd pressed her nose to the glass like a child at a toy store, studying the cramped space with peeling paint and a crooked "for sale" sign. "I used to dream about having a place like this," she'd said, "not for money or recognition, just a space where artists could show their work without compromising their vision for commercial appeal." Liam had kissed the top of her head and made some non-committal sound about Manhattan real estate. She'd thought nothing more of it until 3 weeks later, when he'd blindfolded her in their car and driven through the city with the patience of someone orchestrating a miracle. When he'd removed the silk scarf, she'd been standing in front of the same gallery, but transformed. Fresh cream paint, polished floors, track lighting that could showcase art like precious gems. Above the door, in letters of brushed gold, the Keisha Benjamin Gallery. She'd cried then, ugly, grateful tears, while he held her on the sidewalk as if they were the only 2 people in the world. The space was breathtaking. Soaring ceilings, hardwood floors that gleamed like honey, a back office with a mahogany desk positioned to catch morning light. On the desk, a single white rose in crystal with a note in his careful handwriting. "For the woman who taught me that beauty isn't bought, it's nurtured." Their opening exhibition had been a retrospective of their love story told through commissioned art. 12 painters capturing moments from their relationship, their first dance, the morning he'd proposed on Santorini's cliffs, quiet Sunday afternoons reading together in their library. The night had been packed with Manhattan's cultural elite, but Keisha had only watched her husband moving from painting to painting, telling their story with the pride of someone who'd won love's highest prize. The third memory was built on devotion and repetition, the kind of consistency that most people reserved for religion. Every 15th day of every month, without exception, Liam recreated their first date with obsessive attention to detail. Same restaurant, Le Bernardin, where they kept table 7 permanently reserved. Same wine, 1996 Chateau d'Yquem, that cost more per bottle than most people spent on groceries monthly. Same conversation, same route through Central Park, same goodnight kiss at what had once been her apartment door. "I want to fall in love with you again every month until the stars burn out," he'd explained when she'd teased him about his romantic compulsions. Even during Benjamin Industries' most crucial expansions, acquiring quantum computing startups, negotiating partnerships with tech giants, he never missed their monthly ritual. She'd watched him walk out of merger meetings worth hundreds of millions, ignore calls from senators and foreign ministers, once famously tell the governor of New York that he'd have to wait because his wife was more important than politics. "This matters more than deals or money," he'd say, raising his glass across the candlelit table. "Companies grow, fortunes multiply, but this is the only thing that's irreplaceable." The fourth memory was painted in shades of terror and absolute devotion, born during the worst 2 weeks of Keisha's adult life when pneumonia had settled in her lungs like concrete, and every breath felt like drowning in reverse. She'd collapsed during a charity luncheon, the kind of dramatic fall that made headlines in society pages, and awakened in Mount Sinai's private wing to find Liam beside her bed like a sentry, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "How long?" she'd tried to ask through a throat that felt lined with sandpaper. 4 days. He'd taken her hand as if it were made of spun glass. 4 days of doctors telling me there was nothing to do but wait. 4 days of realizing that every dollar I've earned means nothing if I can't spend it keeping you safe. He'd cancelled a $100 million merger, 8 months of negotiations destroyed with a single phone call to maintain his vigil beside her bed. When the hospital's attending physician suggested she'd recover fine with standard care, Liam had quietly replaced the entire medical team within hours, flying in specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Massachusetts General. He'd slept in the reclining chair beside her bed for 2 weeks, leaving only to shower and change clothes, feeding her ice chips when she was too weak to hold a cup, reading Jane Austen aloud when television was too loud and silence too frightening. "Money can't buy you," he'd whispered one night when he thought she was sleeping, his forehead pressed against their joined hands. "But it can buy the best care, the best doctors, the best chance of keeping you with me. I'll spend every penny, sell every company, if it means one more day of loving you." By the time she was released, Keisha understood something fundamental about her husband that she'd only glimpsed before. His wealth wasn't about power or status. It was armor against loss, insurance against the universe's cruelty, a way of controlling an uncontrollable world through sheer financial force. These 4 memories had become the foundation of her faith in their marriage, proof that she'd chosen correctly when she'd walked away from her own empire to build something bigger with him. They were more than happy moments. They were documentation of love so profound it had its own gravitational pull, bending reality around them until impossible things felt inevitable. In the months to come, when doubt crept in like fog through cracks in their apparently seamless life, Keisha would return to these memories like a drowning woman reaching for life preservers. She'd close her eyes and feel Turks and Caicos sand between her toes, smell turpentine and possibility in her gallery, taste expensive wine and expensive promises, remember the weight of his devotion during her illness. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that memories could be studied and weaponized by someone who understood the psychology of attachment better than most therapists. She didn't know that somewhere in Los Angeles, a graduate student was analyzing every interview they'd given, every photograph published, every public moment of their love story, learning to replicate excellence for the purpose of destroying it. For now, there were only these 4 sacred memories, shining like beacons in the landscape of their love, proof that fairy tales could be real, and princes could be genuine, and love could conquer absolutely everything. She was wrong, of course, but for now, she was beautifully, completely wrong. Chapter 3. Deepening Bond, the Unbreakable Connection. Trust, Keisha discovered, wasn't built in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small reliabilities. The way Liam brought her coffee at exactly 7:15 every morning, how he learned her body's rhythms better than she knew them herself, the quiet certainty that he would choose her again every day without being asked. Their monthly ritual had evolved beyond romance into something approaching religious observance. The 15th of every month belonged to them absolutely, a day when the world could collapse around them and they would still find themselves at table 7 at Le Bernardin, sharing the same bottle of wine they'd discovered together, reciting the liturgy of their first meeting like monks preserving ancient texts. "What did you think when you first saw me?" Liam would ask, as he always did, his fingers tracing patterns on white tablecloth between courses. "That you were insufferably arrogant," she'd reply, the response worn smooth by repetition but no less true for its familiarity. "Bidding on art you clearly didn't understand just to make a point. The point was you." His smile carried years of practice at being charming. Everything else was just strategy. This was their call and response, comfortable as prayer. Even when Benjamin Industries was acquiring quantum computing startups worth hundreds of millions, even when Keisha was orchestrating charity galas that would fund cancer research for decades, the 15th remained untouchable. Liam had walked out of merger meetings with tech giants, ignored calls from senators, once told the Secretary of Commerce that he'd have to wait because his wife was more important than international trade policy. "I want to fall in love with you again every month for eternity," he'd say, raising his glass of wine that cost more than luxury cars. "I want to be surprised by your brilliance, enchanted by your laugh, destroyed by your beauty, over and over until the universe forgets how to make stars." It wasn't just the grand gestures that proved his devotion. It was the small tyrannies of care that revealed the depth of his obsession with their happiness. He memorized her coffee preferences down to temperature and foam consistency. He tracked her menstrual cycle with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, appearing with heating pads and dark chocolate, and the kind of patience that would have impressed saints. When she mentioned loving how afternoon light fell across their bedroom at exactly 4:30, he had the landscaping redesigned to maximize that specific illumination. "You're building a shrine to my preferences," she'd teased him once. "I'm building a life where you never have to want for anything," he'd replied, with the seriousness of someone making vows. But it was during her illness that Keisha truly understood the terrifying intensity of her husband's love, when pneumonia transformed her from a powerful woman into a collection of fragile bones and fever dreams. She'd awakened in Mount Sinai's private wing to find Liam transformed into someone she barely recognized. Stubbled, rumpled, his usual commanding presence replaced by helpless desperation. "The Peterson merger," she'd whispered through cracked lips, remembering the deal that had consumed 8 months of his life. Forget Peterson. The profanity from a man who never swore shocked her more than the sentiment. "I called him personally and told him to take his 100 million and choke on it if he thought it was more important than my wife breathing." He'd slept in that hospital chair for 14 days, turning their private room into a command center where he monitored her care with the same obsessive attention he usually reserved for quarterly reports. When Dr. Martinez suggested her recovery was progressing normally and Liam should consider returning to work, the entire medical team had been replaced within hours. "I want the best pulmonologist on the East Coast," he'd told his assistant, his voice carrying the deadly calm of someone prepared to purchase miracles. "I want the team that saved Senator Richardson. Money is no object and failure is not an option." By morning, her room resembled a medical conference, specialists whose combined expertise could have staffed teaching hospitals. They'd run tests that insurance companies would never approve, prescribed treatments unavailable to ordinary patients, monitored her recovery with technology that felt borrowed from science fiction. "Money can't buy you back if I lose you," He'd whispered against her hair their first night home, holding her as if she might dissolve. "But it can buy the best care, the best doctors, the best chance of keeping you with me. I'll spend every penny, sell every building, burn down every company I've built, if it means one more day of loving you." The experience had bonded them in ways that transcended ordinary marriage. They'd stared into the abyss of loss and chosen each other with renewed desperation. Liam began building redundancies into their life. Multiple homes so they'd never lack shelter, investments diversified across continents so economic collapse couldn't touch them, medical specialists on permanent retainer so illness could never catch them unprepared again. Their friends called them relationship goals, with the envious certainty of people who recognize something they'd never achieve. At charity galas, Keisha watched other couples, the careful distances, the smiles that never reached eyes, the way they touched each other like strangers performing intimacy, and felt smugness she tried to disguise as gratitude. "You two make the rest of us look like amateurs," Victoria Ashford had said at the Met Museum benefit, her voice carrying the particular bitterness of a woman whose husband was currently conducting his third public affair. "What's your secret?" The secret was obsession disguised as love, though Keisha would never have phrased it that way. They were addicted to each other. Consumed by the high of being so seamlessly matched, they seemed to share circulation systems. When Liam was in London for business, she felt physically incomplete. When she traveled to Los Angeles for gallery openings, he called 3 times daily just to hear her breathe. Forbes had featured them on their Power Couples cover, a photograph that captured them looking at each other instead of the camera with expressions of such naked adoration the magazine had needed to adjust the colors to make it suitable for print. "The Benjamin Empire," the headline read, "How Love Built a Fortune and Fortune Built a Love Story." The article detailed their business partnership as much as their marriage, how Keisha's Goldman Sachs expertise had elevated Benjamin Industries from successful to legendary, her marketing genius diversifying them into industries Liam's technical background had never touched. They were exponentially better together than they'd ever been apart, and everyone could see it. Vanity Fair followed with a 12-page spread that made them the subject of dinner party conversations from Manhattan to Malibu. The photographs were stunning, art-directed glimpses into their private world that made their penthouse look like something from architectural fantasies. But it was the candid shots that captured public imagination. Liam bringing Keisha coffee in bed, Keisha adjusting his tie before board meetings, both dancing in their empty living room to music only they could hear. "You have what everyone wants," the interviewer had observed. "Excellence in love and success. Do you ever worry about losing it?" "Every day," Liam had answered, his hand finding Keisha's across space between their chairs. "That's why we never take it for granted. Love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you build together, one choice at a time." Their shared dreams had grown increasingly elaborate as their success compounded. Children who would inherit not just money, but examples of what real love looked like. Retirement to their Tuscan estate, growing old among olive groves and ancient stones. A legacy that would outlast them both. Foundations and scholarships and buildings bearing their names, helping people long after they were gone. "I want to be buried beside you," Keisha had said one night, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat like a lullaby, close enough to hold hands through eternity. "Burial is for people who give up," Liam had laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Science will figure out immortality long before we're ready to leave each other." She'd believed him. Not about immortality, but about their love being the kind that could survive anything. They were building something eternal, something that would outlast their bodies and money and empire. They were writing a love story for the ages. What she didn't know was that love stories could be studied, analyzed, and weaponized by someone who understood the psychology of human attachment better than most people understood their own hearts. Somewhere in Los Angeles, A graduate student was creating detailed psychological profiles of their marriage, identifying vulnerabilities and pressure points with surgical precision. For now, there was only the weight of his hand in hers, the certainty of their shared future, and the beautiful delusion that love was sufficient armor against the world's cruelties. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she could be. Chapter 4. The serpent enters Eden. Precious arrives evil, Keisha would later understand, never announced itself with theatrical entrances or obvious malice. It arrived wearing a grateful smile and carrying wildflowers, speaking in the careful cadences of someone raised to understand that good manners were the most effective camouflage for devastating intentions. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September when Liam burst through their front door with the barely contained energy that usually preceded his most generous impulses, the kind of humanitarian fervor that had once led him to anonymously fund an entire children's hospital because a newspaper article about pediatric cancer had ruined his morning coffee. "Keisha!" His voice echoed through the marble foyer with urgency that made her stomach clench. "I need you to meet someone very important." She descended their grand staircase to find her husband standing beside a young woman who looked like she'd stepped from a pre-Raphaelite painting into their aggressively modern world. Precious Williams possessed the kind of beauty that made other women simultaneously protective and suspicious, tall but unthreatening, blonde but natural, stunning, but with fresh-faced innocence that suggested she'd never learned to weaponize her appearance. "This is Precious Williams," Liam announced, his arm around the girl's shoulders in a gesture purely paternal but destined to haunt Keisha's memory. "Robert Williams's daughter." The name hit like ice water. Robert Williams had saved Benjamin Industries during the tech crash 5 years ago, appearing like financial salvation when even Liam's billions hadn't been enough to weather the storm that had destroyed companies worth more than small nations. He'd materialized with exactly the right connections and precisely the right capital to keep their empire from crumbling into expensive dust. "Oh God," Keisha breathed, descending with her hand pressed to her heart. "How is he?" Liam mentioned the diagnosis. Precious's eyes, genuinely emerald, flecked with gold, that caught light from their crystal chandelier, filled with tears, she blinked away with admirable composure. "He's fighting, but stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors say 6 months if we're fortunate." The story unfolded over dinner in their formal dining room, served on Limoges china that had belonged to European royalty, accompanied by wine that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent. Precious spoke with understated eloquence that betrayed excellent breeding and better education, describing childhood in Homer, Alaska, that sounded extracted from travel magazines, dog sledding beneath northern lights, summers fishing for salmon in pristine waters that reflected mountains like mirrors. "Dad insisted I focus on education before joining the business," she explained, approaching the sea base with delicate manners that spoke of someone raised by a man who understood money meant nothing without class. "He wanted me to earn my master's degree first. I'm finishing my psychology program at Columbia this spring." "Psychology," Keisha repeated, genuinely impressed. "What's your specialization?" "Cognitive behavioral therapy and relationship dynamics." Precious smiled with shy pride of someone discussing genuine passion. "I want to help couples build stronger marriages, understand the psychological patterns that predict lasting love. My thesis examines factors that contribute to long-term marital success." Liam nearly choked on his wine. How wonderfully appropriate. She's studying what we've already mastered. The irony would have been amusing if it hadn't been so precisely, impossibly cruel. "The thing is," Liam continued, leaning forward with intensity he usually reserved for merger negotiations, "Robert specifically asked if Precious could stay with us while she finishes her degree. He wants to know she's safe and cared for when he..." He couldn't complete the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like expensive perfume, too heavy, too overwhelming. Robert Williams had literally preserved their fortune. If he wanted them to care for his daughter during his final months, refusing would have been monstrous. "Of course," Keisha said immediately, because what else could she say? "Precious, you'll take the entire East Wing. It has its own sitting room and bathroom, plenty of space for studying." "I couldn't possibly impose," Precious began, but Keisha dismissed her protests. "Family doesn't impose, and that's what you are now, family." The words felt prophetic in ways that would prove devastating. Precious settled into their home like she'd been born to inhabit marble halls and crystal palaces. She was the ideal houseguest, grateful without being obsequious, helpful without overstepping boundaries, present without being intrusive. She brought thoughtful gifts that told stories rather than displaying wealth. Alaskan salmon, she prepared herself using techniques learned from indigenous fishermen, handcrafted jewelry made by native artists, photographs of landscapes so stunning they looked like beautiful lies. "I wanted to share pieces of home," she explained, presenting Keisha with a necklace of jade and silver that was somehow more beautiful than pieces costing 10 times as much. "Dad always said gifts should tell stories, not just demonstrate bank accounts." Within a week, Precious had charmed their entire household staff. She remembered names, inquired about families, helped Maria improve her English through patient conversation over morning coffee. She organized housekeeping routines with quiet efficiency, suggesting improvements that somehow made everyone's job easier while making the house function more smoothly. "She's a treasure," Eleanor, their head housekeeper, gushed to Keisha. "So polite, so considerate, and brilliant. She helped my Roberto with his college application essay. Columbia accepted him because of her advice." At charity events, Precious was revelatory. She possessed natural grace that made million-dollar donors feel immediately comfortable, discussing art and politics and social causes with equal intelligence. When Keisha introduced her as their houseguest, people responded with warm approval that money couldn't purchase. "She's refreshing," Caroline Pemberton whispered during the Met Museum benefit. "So rare to meet a young person who isn't completely corrupted by advantages. You can tell she's been raised properly." But it was Precious's apparent devotion to their marriage that truly captured Keisha's heart. She listened to their love story with fascination of someone studying a masterpiece, asked thoughtful questions about balancing career and relationship, took notes like she was documenting something precious for posterity. "You two are my inspiration," she said one evening as they sat in the living room, Liam reviewing quarterly reports while Keisha worked on seating charts for their anniversary party. "The way you look at each other, the way you support each other's dreams, it's exactly what I hope to find someday." "You will," Keisha assured her, warmed by obvious admiration. "When you meet the right person, you'll understand why every other relationship felt like rehearsal." "How do you recognize the right person?" Precious asked, curling into her chair like a cat seeking warmth. "What made you certain Liam was different from everyone else?" Keisha launched into their origin story, the meeting, the courtship, the moment she'd realized what they had was worth sacrificing everything else. Precious listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting more details about specific moments. "It's like a fairy tale," she breathed when Keisha finished describing their engagement on Santorini's cliffs. "You surrendered everything for love and gained even more than you lost." "Exactly," Liam said, looking up from his reports with the expression he always wore when discussing their relationship, pride mixed with amazement, as if he still couldn't believe his fortune. "Keisha could have had any life she wanted. The fact that she chose to build one with me is the greatest miracle I've witnessed." Precious's smile was sunshine itself. "I want that. Someone who loves me the way you love each other." "You'll have it," Keisha promised, reaching over to squeeze the girl's hand. Someone as intelligent and genuine as you? The right man will feel like he's won love's lottery. Looking back, Keisha would wonder how she'd missed the calculation behind those emerald eyes. The way Precious's questions were slightly too specific, her interest marginally too intense. She would wonder how someone with a master's degree in psychology had been so blind to psychological manipulation occurring in her own home. But in those first golden weeks, there was only the satisfaction of kindness, of opening their home to someone who needed sanctuary during the worst period of her life. There was only Precious's laughter echoing through their halls, her presence making their already complete life feel somehow more fulfilling. She fit into their world like she'd been designed for it, and perhaps, Keisha would later realize, she had been. Every gesture was calibrated, every response precisely what any reasonable person would want, every moment of her presence a masterclass in being the ideal houseguest, which should have been the first warning sign. Ideal people didn't exist, and ideal houseguests were usually the most dangerous guests of all. But Keisha was blinded by her own generosity, too busy feeling virtuous about her kindness to notice that Precious Williams was studying their marriage with the intensity of a scientist examining specimens. The serpent was in Eden, and she was beautiful, grateful, and absolutely lethal. But for now she was just sweet Precious from Alaska, grieving her dying father and grateful for their kindness, adding light and warmth to their already luminous home. What could possibly go wrong? Chapter 5. The Night of Four Doubts. When paradise cracked, some nights carved themselves into memory with surgical precision, and Thursday, November 18th, would forever exist in Keisha's mind as the evening when paradise began its slow-motion collapse, one carefully orchestrated coincidence at a time. The day had followed its usual luxurious rhythm. Morning spent at the gallery reviewing submissions for their winter exhibition, a collection exploring themes of deception in contemporary art, which would later seem like cosmic irony. Afternoon at the Mandarin Oriental Spa, where hot stone massage and European facials maintained the image of effortless excellence that Manhattan society expected from Mrs. Benjamin. She'd returned home at 6 o'clock, skin glowing and mind peaceful, expecting to find Liam in his study and Precious absorbed in thesis research. Instead, she'd walked into a tableau that would replay in her memory with the clarity trauma brings to detail. Steam escaped their master bathroom like secrets seeking air, and there stood Precious Williams before their marble vanity, wearing Keisha's $3,000 La Perla silk robe. Not just any robe, the champagne-colored one Liam had commissioned for their second anniversary, the one that made her feel like a goddess, the one hanging in the locked section of her walk-in closet behind a door requiring a 7-digit code. "Oh!" Precious startled when she saw Keisha's reflection, cheeks flushing with what appeared to be embarrassment. "Keisha! I'm so sorry. I spilled coffee everywhere and grabbed the first thing I could find. I was just about to change back." The explanation flowed with practiced smoothness, delivered with precisely the right amount of flustered apology. But Keisha's business instincts, honed by years of detecting boardroom deception, caught inconsistencies immediately. The locked closet requiring a code Precious shouldn't possess. The fact that beneath the robe she wore a pristine white blouse and black slacks showing no evidence of coffee stains. The way she navigated the bathroom with familiarity, automatically avoiding the marble step that tripped first-time visitors. Most telling was how Precious had carefully moved Keisha's diamond tennis bracelet aside to arrange her toiletries on the vanity, suggesting intimate knowledge of where hidden jewelry drawers were located. "Of course," Keisha managed, voice steady despite ice forming in her chest. "Accidents happen. Let me find you something else." As she watched Precious retreat to the guest wing, hands shaking slightly as she rehung the robe, Keisha noticed something that made her stomach lurch. The faint indentation on the vanity stool cushion, suggesting this wasn't Precious's first time making herself comfortable in the master bathroom. By 8:30, Keisha had almost convinced herself she was developing paranoia. They were having dinner in the formal dining room, Liam's Thursday tradition of ordering from that impossible-to-reserve sushi place in Tribeca, and conversation flowed with usual easy rhythm. Precious discussed her thesis research, Liam described quantum computing breakthroughs his team had achieved, and Keisha tried ignoring the voice whispering that beautiful young women didn't accidentally access locked closets. Then Liam's phone buzzed against mahogany, the sound slicing through conversation like a blade. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted, the way it did when something genuinely urgent demanded attention. "Emergency business call," he said, already moving toward French doors leading to their private balcony. "Peterson's having complications with a Singapore deal. This shouldn't take long." Through glass, Keisha watched her husband step into crisp November air, phone pressed to his ear. But instead of the tense concentration she expected during crisis management, Liam was smiling, laughing even. She could have sworn she saw him mouth "beautiful" with an expression of such tenderness it made her chest tighten with confusion. The call lasted exactly 10 minutes. When Liam returned, his face had resumed professional composure. Crisis averted, just the usual complications with international transfers. But before Keisha could respond, Precious rose gracefully from her chair, napkin folded with precise manners that spoke of expensive finishing schools. "I should call home and check on Dad. You know how he worries when he doesn't hear from me." She disappeared toward the guest wing, and Keisha noticed she walked with the same relaxed confidence Liam had displayed during his supposedly stressful business call. When Precious returned 15 minutes later, she radiated the contentment that comes from good news, not the subdued worry of someone checking on a dying parent. The timing was too precise, too choreographed, both disappearing for phone calls at nearly identical moments, both returning with expressions that contradicted their supposed conversations. Keisha felt the foundation of her world shift imperceptibly, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Dessert was tiramisu from their favorite Italian bakery, accompanied by espresso and conversation that felt increasingly surreal. Precious was describing childhood memories of Alaska, dog sledding with her father, watching northern lights paint impossible colors across winter skies, when she mentioned something that made Keisha's blood freeze. "Dad used to say everyone carries childhood fears into adulthood," Precious said, voice warm with nostalgia. "Like how Liam still gets terrified during thunderstorms. He has this ritual, hiding under the stairs, humming his mother's lullaby. It's actually quite endearing." The words struck like physical blows. Liam's storm phobia was his most closely guarded secret, something he'd shared only after 2 years of marriage, and only during a particularly violent storm that had left him pale and shaking. She was the sole person who knew about his childhood ritual of hiding under the staircase in his parents' house, humming the Russian lullaby his mother had sung when he was small. This was intimate knowledge, the kind of vulnerability shared only with those trusted most completely. "When did he tell you about that?" Keisha asked, voice carefully neutral. Liam's face had gone ashen, his espresso cup frozen halfway to his lips. "I must have mentioned it during one of our study sessions," he said, but his voice carried the uncertain tone of someone trying to remember a lie. "Study sessions?" Keisha turned to Precious, who smiled with serene confidence. "Oh yes, Liam's been helping me with business psychology aspects of my thesis. We've had several extended conversations about childhood experiences and how they shape adult relationships." Precious's voice was honey-sweet, but something sharp lurked underneath, like a blade wrapped in silk. "He also told me about the scar on his knee from falling off his bike at 7. And how his first dog was named Einstein because it was the smartest golden retriever anyone had ever seen." Each detail was another knife in Keisha's chest. These weren't casual anecdotes. They were the building blocks of intimacy, small secrets Liam had shared during their most private moments. The scar he usually kept hidden, the dog he still missed decades later, the vulnerable boy who'd never quite outgrown his fear of storms. "You have remarkable memory," Keisha managed. "Psychology training," Precious replied with modest shrug. "You learn to pay attention to details. They're usually the most revealing part of understanding someone." The final blow came as they prepared to leave the dining room. Precious stretched gracefully and suggested they should all visit that amazing Italian place on 47th Street for dinner the following week. "You know," she continued, voice bright with enthusiasm, "the one with the private booth in the corner where the lighting is so romantic. Ristorante Milano. I've heard Giuseppe makes incredible osso buco." Keisha felt the room tilt around her. Ristorante Milano was their sanctuary, the restaurant where Liam had taken her on their first date, where they still went for monthly rituals. Table 7 in the corner where Giuseppe always seated them, where they ordered the same vintage wine and shared the same memories month after month. It was sacred ground, a place she'd believed belonged exclusively to them. "How do you know about Milano?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Oh, I've been researching romantic restaurants for a friend planning a proposal," Precious replied smoothly. "I wanted authentic Italian atmosphere with impeccable reputations. Milano appeared on every most romantic list." But Keisha caught Liam's hands, clenching into fists beneath the table, his breathing becoming deliberately controlled. This wasn't casual research. This was intimate knowledge of their most private traditions. "Giuseppe is wonderful," Precious continued, apparently oblivious to the tension she'd created. "I heard he remembers every couple's anniversary and keeps their favorite wine in stock. Such attention to detail." Conversation moved on, but Keisha remained frozen, her mind racing through the evening's events like a computer processing data. 4 incidents in 4 hours, each explainable individually, but together forming a pattern that made her stomach churn with dread. The silk robe in the locked closet, the synchronized phone calls, the intimate childhood secrets, the knowledge of their sanctuary restaurant. 1 coincidence could be explained, 2 could be rationalized, 3 stretched credibility, but 4 in a single evening felt like coordinated assault, each strike designed to plant seeds of doubt in soil that had never known suspicion. That night, as Liam slept peacefully beside her, Keisha lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself she was developing paranoia. Precious was a sweet girl experiencing the worst period of her life, grateful for their kindness, and perhaps overeager to bond with the family caring for her. The incidents were coincidences, her own insecurities projecting malice where none existed. But the executive in her, the woman who'd built a career reading people and detecting deception, couldn't ignore the data. Someone with a master's degree in psychology would understand exactly how to manipulate human emotions, how to create doubt and suspicion with surgical precision. Someone studying relationship dynamics would know precisely which pressure points to press to destabilize a marriage from within. As dawn crept through bedroom windows, Keisha made a decision that would change everything. She was going to start paying attention, really paying attention, to Precious Williams and her impossibly seamless integration into their life. Because ideal people didn't exist, and ideal houseguests were usually the most dangerous guests of all. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Keisha was about to discover that some seeds grew faster than others, especially when watered with lies and tended by someone who understood exactly how to cultivate destruction. Chapter 6. Growing Suspicions. The web of lies expands. Suspicion, Keisha discovered, was like a virus that rewrote the code of ordinary life, transforming innocent gestures into proof and coincidences into conspiracies until she could no longer distinguish between legitimate concern and the paranoia that comes from loving someone too much to lose them gracefully. The changes in Liam began as subtle variations in their domestic symphony, his phone migrating from its usual place face up on their nightstand to face down with the focused determination of someone guarding state secrets. When she asked him for the passcode to order Thai food while he showered, he claimed he'd changed it for security reasons but couldn't recall the new numbers. "I'll order when I'm out," he'd said, water still beading on his shoulders, his eyes sliding past hers with the practiced evasion of someone who'd recently learned to lie. "They know our usual anyway." But Keisha had been ordering from Siam Palace for 36 months, and they'd never known their preferences without being told. It was a meaningless deception, but it lodged in her chest like a splinter that grew more painful with examination. His schedule developed mysterious lacunae that hadn't existed before Precious's arrival. Late business meetings 3 nights weekly, always Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays, always concluding around 11 with apologies about difficult clients and complex negotiations. The timing was suspiciously convenient, mirroring Precious's study groups with choreographed precision. "How was the Peterson merger discussion?" Keisha asked one Thursday as Liam slipped into bed beside her, his hair carrying the faint scent of November air and something else, a perfume that wasn't hers. "Complicated," he replied, which had become his default response to anything business-related. International patent law is Byzantine when you're dealing with quantum computing. But when she checked his calendar the following morning, no Peterson meeting appeared anywhere. When she called Margaret, his assistant, to clarify evening appointments, the woman sounded genuinely puzzled. "Mr. Benjamin left the office at 4:30 yesterday, Mrs. Benjamin. He said he wouldn't be reachable until morning." 7 hours unaccounted for, and Liam sleeping peacefully beside her as if deception had become as natural as respiration. The cologne was new too, something woody and expensive that replaced the custom French fragrance she'd given him for their 2nd anniversary. When questioned, he claimed his usual bottle had broken and this was temporary, but she'd found the supposedly shattered bottle still full in his bathroom drawer, hidden behind towels like documentation of adultery. Even more disturbing were changes in their physical intimacy. Liam had always been a present lover, focused with intensity that made her feel like the only woman in existence. But lately, he seemed elsewhere during their most private moments. Eyes closed, not with pleasure but concentration, as if imagining himself in different arms. Once, while making love, he'd whispered a name that wasn't hers, something beginning with Prec, before catching himself and covering with Precious Girl in a voice that sounded forced and desperate. She'd pretended not to notice, had continued moving beneath him with mechanical precision while her heart fractured into pieces small enough to slip through cracks in their marble floors. But it was Precious's gradual assumption of authority within their household that truly convinced Keisha something sinister was orchestrating itself beneath her roof. It began incrementally, rearranging flowers in the foyer because lilies clash with marble, reorganizing the pantry because efficiency matters in busy households, suggesting staff schedule modifications because Elena mentioned wanting more time with her grandchildren. Each change was reasonable, presented with helpful enthusiasm that made objecting seem petty. But the cumulative effect was erosion of Keisha's dominion in her own home, death by 1,000 small surrenders. "Precious has such wonderful insights," Elena gushed during their weekly household meeting. She suggested rotating the cleaning schedule to maximize natural light, and everything gets done so much faster now. What Elena didn't mention was that the new schedule left Precious alone in the master suite every Tuesday afternoon while Keisha was at the gallery and Liam was supposedly in meetings. What Elena didn't know was that Keisha had begun finding traces of Precious's presence in their private spaces. Bobby pins on bathroom counters, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in walk-in closets, subtle disturbances in jewelry arrangements that suggested someone had been examining her most treasured possessions. The social humiliation began in early December, when food poisoning struck the night of the Metropolitan Opera's Winter Gala. She'd anticipated the event for months. It was the kind of high-profile charity function where Manhattan's elite displayed their cultural sophistication like peacocks exhibiting plumage. "You should still attend," she'd told Liam from their bed, alternating between fever and chills like a malfunctioning thermostat. "The foundation expects a significant donation from us. Someone needs to represent Benjamin Industries." "I'll take Precious," he'd replied, the suggestion emerging so quickly it felt rehearsed. "She understands charitable giving's importance, and she's been working so hard. A night out would benefit her." Keisha had agreed because refusing would have seemed selfish. Because Precious deserved pleasant experiences during this difficult period, because she trusted her husband completely and had no reason to suspect his kindness was actually cruelty in disguise. The photographs appeared on page 6 within days. Liam in his impeccable tuxedo, Precious in a stunning midnight blue gown that looked suspiciously like the one Keisha had returned to Bergdorf Goodman the previous week, because it was too formal for the charity luncheon she'd planned to attend. They were dancing in the Metropolitan Opera House's grand foyer, Precious's head tilted back in laughter, Liam gazing down at her with naked adoration the photographer had captured for posterity. "Manhattan's most eligible bachelor," the caption read. "Tech billionaire Liam Benjamin escorts mysterious beauty to opera gala while wife recovers from illness." Phone calls began immediately, friends offering sympathy with voices barely concealing their excitement at proximity to scandal. Acquaintances asking if she'd seen the photographs with false concern that meant they absolutely hoped she had. Her sister Maya calling from Los Angeles with barely contained fury. "Keisha, what the hell is happening? Who is this girl, and why is she wearing your husband like an accessory?" "She's Robert Williams' daughter," Keisha had explained, hating how defensive she sounded. "She's staying with us while her father is dying. The photographs make it appear worse than it is." "Do they?" Maya's voice carried skepticism of someone who'd never trusted Liam's too seamless facade. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your husband took a beautiful young woman to a romantic event and forgot he was married." Whispers followed Keisha everywhere afterward. At the gallery, visitors who'd previously treated her with respect began offering pitying smiles and carefully worded inquiries about how she was managing. At charity luncheons, conversations stopped abruptly when she approached, resuming with forced brightness that fooled no one. "Poor Keisha," she overheard Victoria Ashford whisper to Caroline Pemberton at the Children's Hospital benefit. "She has no idea what's happening in her own house." "Someone should inform her," Caroline whispered back. "It's painful to witness." "Would you want to know?" Victoria replied. "Sometimes ignorance truly is bliss." But ignorance was a luxury Keisha could no longer afford. Her business instincts, sharpened by years of detecting corporate espionage and boardroom betrayal, were screaming that she was under assault by someone who understood psychological warfare better than most generals understood military strategy. She began documenting everything with methodical precision that had made her Goldman Sachs's youngest vice president. Photographs of disturbances in personal belongings, screenshots of credit card statements showing purchases she hadn't authorized, a detailed timeline of Liam's mysterious meetings and Precious's convenient absences. The documentation was circumstantial but damning. Hotel charges in cities where Liam claimed to attend solo conferences, jewelry purchases exactly matching pieces in Keisha's collection, as if someone was building a duplicate wardrobe, restaurant receipts from intimate dinners for two during hours when both Liam and Precious claimed to be elsewhere. The most disturbing discovery came when she hired Elena Rodriguez, a private investigator specializing in matrimonial cases with a client list reading like a directory of Manhattan's elite wives who'd suspected their husbands of infidelity. Mrs. Benjamin, Elena had said during their first meeting in a discreet village coffee shop, I need you to understand that once I begin investigating, there's no returning to ignorance. If your husband is conducting an affair, we're going to find documentation. Are you prepared for what that might reveal? Keisha had stared into her latte and contemplated 36 months of seamless marriage, the empire they'd built together, the fairy tale that might be revealed as the cruelest lie ever constructed. Find the truth, she'd said. Whatever it costs, whatever it destroys, I need to know the truth. But truth, she was about to discover, was a weapon that cut in all directions, and sometimes the people you loved most were the ones wielding the sharpest blades. The investigation was beginning, and with it, the systematic demolition of everything Keisha had believed about love, trust, and the man who'd promised her forever. Paradise was crumbling, one carefully documented lie at a time. Chapter 7. Cracks in Paradise. The evidence mounts. Truth, Keisha learned, arrived not as revelation but as accumulation. Each piece of documentation another weight added to scales that had been tipping toward devastation for months, until the moment when denial became physically impossible and she had to confront the mathematical certainty of her husband's betrayal. Elena Rodriguez delivered the financial records in a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the gravity of 36 months of marriage, dissolving into spreadsheets and receipts that told a story more devastating than any confession. They met in their usual coffee shop in the village, a place anonymous enough for secrets, but civilized enough for the kind of conversation that would reshape Keisha's understanding of her own life. I need you to prepare yourself, Elena said, spreading papers across the small table with the clinical precision of a surgeon displaying a patient's pathology. Your husband has been conducting 2 financial lives, and he's been remarkably careless about hiding the second one. The credit card statements revealed a shadow economy of deception running parallel to their legitimate expenses. Cartier purchases for $15,000 diamond earrings, identical to the ones Liam had given Keisha for their anniversary, as if uniqueness was too expensive even for a billionaire's guilt. A $30,000 shopping expedition at Bergdorf Goodman on a Tuesday afternoon, when he'd claimed to be negotiating with Japanese investors, the itemized list reading like a blueprint for creating a second wife. Evening gowns, lingerie, shoes, handbags, everything a young woman would need to play Manhattan socialite. Examine the dates, Eleanor said, her finger tracing the timeline of financial infidelity. November 15th, the day before the opera gala. He purchased the midnight blue gown she wore. This wasn't spontaneous, it was orchestrated. But the hotel charges proved most devastating because they involved the same luxury establishments where she and Liam had celebrated their own milestones, now serving as stages for his betrayal. The Plaza, the Street Regis, the Pierre, each receipt a small death. Room service charges for champagne and strawberries, couple spa treatments, late checkout fees suggesting mornings spent in bed, while Keisha waited at home for his return from fictional business obligations. Chicago, November 8th, Elena continued, extracting another set of receipts. The Ritz-Carlton, presidential suite, 2 nights. Your husband told you he was attending a quantum computing conference, correct? Keisha nodded, remembering how Liam had called each evening from his hotel room, describing tedious presentations and networking dinners while she missed him from their empty penthouse. There was no quantum computing conference in Chicago that week, Elena said quietly. I verified with every major technology organization, but here are charges for couples massages, dinner at Alinea for 2 and... She paused, her professional composure faltering slightly. Purchases from the hotel boutique for lingerie. The sizes and style preferences match your houseguest precisely. The documentation painted a portrait so detailed, it felt like watching a film of her husband's betrayal frame by frame. Precious's supposed student budget that somehow afforded designer clothes and luxury spa treatments now made sense. She wasn't funding any of it. Liam was bankrolling her entire lifestyle, creating a parallel universe where she could rehearse the role of his wife without the inconvenience of divorce proceedings. "They've been careful about not repeating hotels," Elena explained, spreading a map of Manhattan marked with red pins. "But patterns emerge. Always upscale establishments, always on nights when you have confirmed alibis. Gallery events, charity functions, visits to your sister. They've been studying your schedule like military strategists." The hotel security footage was worse than receipts, because it showed them as they truly were, rather than how they performed for Keisha. Elena's contacts in the hospitality industry had preserved surveillance videos that should have been destroyed by standard protocol, but had been maintained through the kind of professional corruption that money could facilitate. Watching Liam and Precious together in hotel lobbies was like observing strangers wearing the faces of people she thought she knew. They moved with fluid intimacy of long-term lovers, not the awkward politeness of mentor and student. Liam's hand rested on Precious's lower back with possessive familiarity as they walked through the plaza's lobby. Precious kissed him in elevators with passion of someone who'd been practicing for months, not the hesitant affection of new romance. They looked at each other the way Keisha had believed Liam looked only at her, with complete absorption, as if the rest of existence had ceased to matter. "How long?" Keisha whispered, watching her husband embrace another woman with the same tenderness he'd shown her that very morning. "Based on financial trails, at least 4 months, Elena replied. "But I suspect it began earlier. These people are sophisticated. They understood how to hide their tracks. What we're seeing represents moments when they became careless. Restaurant documentation was particularly cruel because it violated their sanctuary spaces, the private rituals Keisha had believed belonged exclusively to them. Ristorante Milano, where she and Liam renewed their vows monthly, had also been hosting Precious for intimate dinners that exactly paralleled their own traditions. Same table, same wine, same owner who treated them like family, except Giuseppe had been unknowingly facilitating 2 versions of the same love story. "He's been recreating your relationship with her," Elena explained, showing Keisha receipts from their sanctuary. "Same dates, same orders, same romantic gestures. It's like he's conducting a split-screen experiment to determine which version of his life he prefers." Phone records revealed hundreds of calls and texts between Liam and Precious, conversations occurring during business hours when they were supposedly focused on their respective work. The timing was surgically precise. Calls made during Keisha's standing appointments, texts sent while she was in meetings, a constant communication stream that ran parallel to their marriage like background music she'd never been meant to hear. "They're not just conducting an affair," Eleanor said, her voice carrying grim certainty of someone who'd witnessed this pattern before. "They're building a relationship. This isn't recreational, it's replacement." The most devastating documentation came from witness testimonies Eleanor had collected through her network of hospitality contacts. Waiters who remembered serving them anniversary dinners that weren't their anniversaries. Hotel staff who'd been tipped generously to ensure privacy during romantic getaways that occurred while Keisha worked late at the gallery. Boutique employees who'd helped Precious select gifts for her husband, while Liam waited in luxury vehicles outside. "The girl knows your entire life story," a Tiffany sales associate had told Elena. "She described your jewelry collection in detail, said she wanted pieces that would complement but not compete with her partner's wife's taste. She was very specific about avoiding duplicates." Even more chilling was revelation that their affair had its own traditions, its own rituals that mirrored the ones Keisha thought were unique to her marriage. Monthly dinners at restaurants she'd never heard of, weekend trips to destinations she'd never visited, private jokes and shared memories that had been accumulating while she lived in blissful ignorance. "They have their own anniversary," Elena said, consulting her notes. "September 15th, the day she moved into your home. They've been celebrating it monthly, just like you and your husband celebrate yours." The investigation had revealed something worse than simple adultery. It was identity theft on an emotional level, systematic replacement of one life with another. Precious wasn't just sleeping with Liam. She was becoming Keisha, absorbing the role of Mrs. Benjamin piece by piece until the original became redundant. "There's something else," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to whisper. "Something you need to understand about Precious Williams herself." She slid a final folder across the table, this one containing information that would shatter Keisha's last assumptions about the girl she'd welcomed into her home like family. "Robert Williams doesn't exist," Elena said simply. "There's no record of anyone by that name in the technology industry, no business partnerships with your husband's company, no dying father in Alaska. Precious Williams isn't who she claims to be." The room seemed to rotate around Keisha as the magnitude of deception became clear. Not just infidelity, but elaborate fraud. Not just betrayal, but calculated psychological warfare waged by someone who'd studied their marriage like a textbook and identified every vulnerability, every pressure point, every method to destroy them from within. "Then who is she?" Keisha managed. "Her real name is Patricia Williams, and she's from Los Angeles, not Alaska. She has a master's degree in psychology with specialization in relationship manipulation and cognitive behavioral therapy. She's been researching your marriage for over a year, studying every interview you've given, every photograph published, every public appearance you've made together." Elena produced surveillance photographs showing Patricia, in Los Angeles, months before she'd appeared in their lives, meeting with people whose faces Keisha didn't recognize, but whose body language suggested professional consultation. "She didn't randomly appear at your door, Mrs. Benjamin. She targeted your husband specifically, researched his weaknesses, designed a campaign to seduce him away from you. This wasn't an affair. It was a hostile takeover. The documentation was overwhelming, undeniable, devastating. 36 months of seamless marriage revealed as elaborate theater, performed for an audience of one, while the real drama played out in hotel rooms and restaurants and private moments Keisha had never been meant to discover. But beneath the pain and betrayal, something else was crystallizing in Keisha's chest, something cold and calculating and absolutely lethal. The same business instincts that had made her Goldman Sachs' youngest vice president were analyzing the situation with surgical precision, identifying weaknesses in their position, planning a counterattack that would leave no survivors. "I want everything," she told Elena, her voice steady despite the earthquake occurring inside her chest. "Every receipt, every photograph, every witness statement, every piece of documentation that proves what they've done. I want enough ammunition to destroy them both." "Mrs. Benjamin," Eleanor said carefully, "are you certain you want to escalate this? Sometimes the best revenge is a quiet divorce and a generous settlement." Keisha looked at the documentation spread across the table, the financial fraud, the identity theft, the systematic destruction of everything she'd built and believed in, and felt something crystallize inside her that was harder than diamonds and twice as sharp. "They didn't just betray me," she said quietly. "They studied me, manipulated me, made me complicit in my own humiliation. They turned my kindness into a weapon against me." She stood, gathering documentation with hands that were steady, despite the fact that her entire world had just collapsed around her. "I don't want revenge," she said, looking Elena directly in the eyes. "I want justice, and I want it served so completely that they'll never recover from the experience." The war was about to begin, and Keisha Benjamin had just realized she'd been fighting it for months without knowing it. Now, it was time to start winning. Chapter 8. The breaking point, truth-revealed fury Keisha discovered was not the volcanic emotion depicted in literature. It was crystalline clarity that moved through her veins like liquid nitrogen, freezing everything it touched until she felt like a specimen of rage encased in diamond-hard determination. Elena Rodriguez had achieved the impossible. A complete psychological autopsy of Patricia Williams that read like a dissertation on predatory behavior disguised as academic research. Patricia had spent 2 years at UCLA studying relationship dynamics, not to heal couples, but to identify the precise pressure points where loving partnerships could be systematically dismantled. She approached marriage destruction like corporate acquisition, Elena explained, spreading Patricia's academic records across their usual table like documentation in a war crimes tribunal. Her undergraduate thesis was titled Psychological Vulnerabilities in High Net Worth Marriages, Identifying and Exploiting Emotional Dependencies. Her professors believed she was studying prevention methodologies. She was actually creating a manual for sophisticated home wrecking. The research files were terrifying in their thoroughness. Patricia had compiled detailed psychological profiles of Manhattan's wealthiest couples, identifying which marriages contained exploitable fractures and which husbands could be successfully targeted. Liam hadn't been randomly selected. He'd been chosen after months of analysis that identified him as optimal prey, successful enough to justify the effort, devoted enough to his wife to present interesting challenges, and emotionally vulnerable enough to be manipulated once his psychological defenses were compromised. "Examine this," Eleanor said, pointing to handwritten notes in Patricia's careful script. She identified your husband's specific psychological profile. Subject demonstrates classic imposter syndrome despite obvious success. Underlying insecurity about deserving love suggests susceptibility to validation-seeking behavior. Wife's professional sacrifice creates guilt complex that can be exploited through strategic positioning as career-focused alternative. Every detail of their life together had been weaponized against them. Patricia had analyzed their public interviews, studied their body language at charity events, even obtained guest lists from functions they attended to identify which socialites might provide useful intelligence about their private dynamics. She'd approached this seduction like a military campaign, complete with reconnaissance and strategic planning. She spent 6 months in New York before ever approaching your husband, Eleanor continued, working as hostess at restaurants you frequented, taking yoga classes at your gym, positioning herself in your social ecosystem until an introduction felt organic rather than orchestrated. The meeting at the technology conference hadn't been coincidental. Patricia had purchased admission specifically to target Liam. She wanted to destroy them completely, professionally, financially, socially, and emotionally. She wanted them to understand exactly what it felt like to have their entire world revealed as an elaborate deception. "I want comprehensive intelligence on Patricia Williams," she told Eleanor. Her authentic background, her financial situation, her family, her previous victims. If she wants to engage in psychological warfare, I'm going to demonstrate what happens when she targets someone more skilled at it than she is. The investigation revealed that Patricia was essentially bankrupt, surviving on credit cards and student loans while maintaining the facade of wealthy sophistication. Her parents in Los Angeles were middle-class accountants who believed their daughter was studying abroad in Europe. Her previous affairs had ended when she was discovered, leaving her with nothing but refined skills for targeting the next wealthy husband. "She's not in love with your husband," Eleanor reported. "She's in love with his financial portfolio. This is economic predation disguised as romance." But it was the discovery of Patricia's detailed plans for the future that truly revealed the scope of her ambition. Hidden in her laptop, which Elena's contact in hotel security had accessed during one of their romantic getaways, were documents that outlined her strategy for complete replacement of Keisha in Liam's life. "She's been planning your systematic destruction for months," Elena said, showing Keisha printouts that read like military strategy. Social isolation, financial dependence, emotional manipulation. She's been methodically destroying your support systems while positioning herself as the only person your husband can trust. The plan included specific tactics for making Keisha appear unstable, unreliable, and unworthy of her position in Manhattan society. Patricia had been subtly undermining her relationships with friends, planting seeds of doubt about her mental health, even researching methods to trigger behavior that could be interpreted as paranoid or controlling. "She's been gaslighting you for months," Elena explained. "Those incidents that made you feel insane, the robe, the phone calls, the intimate details, they were deliberate. She wanted you to suspect, wanted you to question your own perceptions, wanted you to appear unstable when you finally confronted the truth." But Patricia had miscalculated the strength of her opponent. Instead of fracturing under psychological pressure, Keisha had channeled her business instincts into investigative precision. Instead of becoming the unstable wife Patricia wanted to portray, she had become a detective collecting prosecution-quality documentation. "They believe they're in control," Keisha said, studying the documents that revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. "They think I'm still the naive wife who trusts her husband and welcomes houseguests with open arms." She looked up at Elena with a smile that carried the promise of absolute annihilation. "It's time to demonstrate how catastrophically wrong they are." The counterattack was about to commence, and Keisha Benjamin had just realized that she wasn't the victim in this narrative. She was the avenging angel who had been positioned to deliver justice with compound interest. Patricia Williams had studied psychological warfare, but she'd never faced a Goldman Sachs-trained predator who understood how to use money, influence, and strategic planning as weapons of mass destruction. The student was about to become the teacher, and the lesson was going to be absolutely unforgettable. Chapter 9. The Dinner Announcement. The Final Betrayal. There are moments when the universe pauses to witness its own cruelty, when years of carefully constructed lies reach the precise point where one more deception will topple the entire architecture, and Saturday evening, December 15th, was destined to be the night when 36 months of seamless marriage finally revealed itself as the most sophisticated con game ever orchestrated. Keisha had spent the week preparing for this dinner with the methodical precision of a general planning the decisive engagement of a war, every detail choreographed to create the optimal stage for her counterattack. The formal dining room had been arranged with their wedding china, Limoges porcelain that had cost more than luxury automobiles, and baccarat crystal that caught candlelight like frozen tears. Fresh white roses from their florist arranged with mathematical precision, wine from their private cellar that had been aging since before Patricia Williams was born, and an atmosphere of elegant sophistication that would make the coming destruction even more devastating by contrast. The guest list was carefully curated for maximum impact. Liam's parents, Eleanor and Harrison Benjamin, who represented old Manhattan money and older moral values. Keisha's sister Maya, who had flown from Los Angeles with barely contained fury of someone who'd never trusted Liam's too seamless facade. And of course, the stars of this particular tragedy, her beloved husband and his precious protégé, both blissfully unaware that they were about to be exposed before the people whose opinions mattered most. "Everything looks exquisite, darling," Eleanor said as she air-kissed Keisha in the foyer, her diamond tennis bracelet catching light from their crystal chandelier. "Such attention to detail. You've always been the consummate hostess." Eleanor Benjamin was Manhattan royalty in the truest sense, descended from families who'd built fortunes in steel and railroads, who'd survived the Great Depression by being too wealthy to fail and too established to fall. She wore her 72 years with understated elegance that money could purchase, but breeding had to teach. And she'd never fully approved of her son's choice to marry a woman who'd worked for her fortune rather than inheriting it. Harrison Benjamin followed his wife with measured stride of someone who'd learned to let Eleanor handle social niceties while he focused on the business of being important. At 75, he still commanded boardrooms with authority of someone who'd never questioned his right to rule. whose handshake could move markets and whose disapproval could end careers. Maya arrived with barely contained energy of someone who'd spent 5 hours on a plane contemplating all the ways she wanted to destroy her brother-in-law. Her protective instincts sharpened to surgical precision by weeks of watching her sister's life disintegrate from 3,000 miles away. "Where is he?" Maya whispered as she embraced Keisha, her voice carrying the promise of violence that only sisters could inspire in each other. "Where's the bastard? And how much trouble will I get in for castrating him with a butter knife?" "Patience," Keisha murmured back, surprised by how calm she felt now that the moment had finally arrived. "Let them destroy themselves. It's infinitely more satisfying than doing it for them." Liam appeared at the top of the stairs wearing his impeccably tailored Tom Ford dinner jacket, looking like he'd stepped from a magazine spread about successful men who had everything they could ever want. His smile was radiant as he descended to greet his parents, the devoted son playing his role with the same precision he'd brought to playing the devoted husband. Patricia made her entrance with dramatic timing of someone who understood that being fashionably late created anticipation, sweeping into the foyer wearing a midnight blue cocktail dress that Keisha recognized from the Bergdorf receipts Eleanor had uncovered. Her hair was arranged in an elegant updo that showcased diamond earrings, Liam's anniversary gift to Keisha, reproduced in exact detail for his mistress, and she moved with confidence of someone who believed she'd already achieved victory. "Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin," she said, offering her hand to Liam's parents with optimal balance of respect and familiarity. "It's such an honor to finally meet you properly. Liam speaks of you constantly." Dinner conversation flowed with carefully orchestrated pleasantness that Manhattan society had refined over generations of practice. Patricia charmed Harrison with intelligent questions about the technology industry, impressed Eleanor with her knowledge of art and culture, and played the role of grateful houseguest with such excellence that even Maya seemed momentarily disarmed by her apparent sincerity. "You've raised an extraordinary son," Patricia told the elder Benjamins as the main course was served. "The kindness he's shown during my father's illness has been a blessing beyond words." Eleanor smiled with maternal pride. "Liam has always been generous with those who matter to him." The irony was so exquisite that Keisha had to restrain herself from laughing. Patricia did matter to Liam, just not in the way she was pretending, and certainly not in the way that would survive the next 20 minutes. It was during the transition between main course and dessert that Patricia made her move, standing gracefully from her chair with theatrical timing that suggested this moment had been extensively rehearsed. She tapped her crystal wineglass with her dessert spoon, the sound cutting through conversation with clarity of a bell announcing the beginning of an execution. "I hope you'll forgive the interruption," she said, her voice carrying precisely the right amount of nervous excitement, "but I have wonderful news that I simply can't contain any longer." Keisha felt time decelerate as she watched her husband's face, saw the moment when anticipation shifted to panic as he realized what Patricia was about to do. His wineglass paused halfway to his lips, his eyes widening with terror that comes from watching a carefully constructed lie about to explode before the people whose opinions matter most. "Liam and I have decided that I should make my stay here permanent," Patricia announced, her voice bright with triumph. "We've grown so close during these difficult months, and this house has truly become my home. I can't imagine being anywhere else." The silence that followed was so complete that Keisha could hear the soft tick of the antique clock in the corner, counting seconds until their world finished collapsing. Eleanor's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, her expression shifting from polite interest to shocked confusion. Harrison's face darkened with controlled fury that came from realizing he'd been played for a fool. Maya's chair scraped against marble as she leaned forward, protective instincts triggered by obvious threat to her sister's marriage. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying deceptive sweetness that preceded sisterly violence, "but what exactly are you saying?" But it was Liam's response that truly shattered whatever remained of Keisha's faith in human decency. Instead of objecting, instead of clarifying misunderstanding, instead of protecting the wife who'd sacrificed everything for their marriage, he smiled. He actually smiled, reaching across the table to take Patricia's hand with tender possessiveness he'd once reserved for Keisha alone. "Precious has become essential to our family," he said, his voice carrying conviction of someone who'd finally stopped pretending. "She brings such light and joy to our home. It's impossible to imagine life without her now." Eleanor gasped, her wineglass slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter against marble in a cascade of crystal and cabernet that looked like scattered blood. Harrison's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple that indicated stroke-level blood pressure. Patricia leaned into Liam's touch with practiced intimacy that spoke of months of rehearsal, her emerald eyes bright with tears that looked suspiciously calculated. "I know this might seem sudden," she continued, her voice trembling with emotion that would have been convincing if Keisha hadn't known it was completely fabricated. "But sometimes love doesn't follow expected timelines. Sometimes it finds us when we least expect it and changes everything we thought we knew about ourselves." Maya stood so abruptly that her chair toppled backward, the crash echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" she said, her Los Angeles directness cutting through Manhattan politeness like a blade. "Keisha, are you hearing this? Are you going to let this little homewrecker announce her hostile takeover of your marriage at your own dinner table?" But Keisha remained seated, her hands folded in her lap with supernatural calm that comes from knowing exactly what's about to happen next. She'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, and she was surprised to discover that watching her marriage die before their families felt almost anticlimactic after everything she'd already endured. "How interesting, Patricia," she said finally, her voice carrying pleasant tone she used for discussing art exhibitions and charity fundraisers. "Such bold plans for the future. And Liam, how thoughtful of you to make such important decisions without consulting your wife." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as everyone registered the deadly calm in Keisha's voice. This wasn't the reaction of a woman blindsided by betrayal. This was the response of someone who'd been expecting this moment and had prepared accordingly. "Actually," Keisha continued, rising from her chair with fluid grace of someone who'd never doubted her own power, "I have a couple of surprises of my own to share this evening. But let's finish dessert first, shall we? No need to rush these revelations." She smiled at Patricia with predatory warmth that should have sent survival instincts screaming, but the younger woman was too intoxicated by her own victory to recognize the approaching tsunami. "After all," Keisha added, her eyes meeting Liam's across the table with promise of absolute destruction, "some surprises are worth savoring." Keisha Benjamin had been playing chess while they were playing checkers, and checkmate was about to be served with dessert. Chapter 10. The Perfect Revenge. Justice Served. Justice, Keisha had learned, was not a dish best served cold. It was a banquet, best served with impeccable timing, flawless presentation, and an audience that would never forget the experience of witnessing complete destruction. The dessert course arrived as if summoned by fate itself, individual chocolate soufflés that rose like dark omens above their plates, accompanied by champagne that bubbled with effervescence of celebration about to transform into devastation. Patricia still glowed with triumph of her announcement, her hand resting in Liam's with possessive confidence of someone who believed she'd just won the ultimate prize. "Before we begin dessert," Keisha said, rising from her chair with fluid grace of someone who'd choreographed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, "I promised you all some surprises of my own, and I always honor my promises." She moved to the ornate sideboard where Elena Rodriguez waited like an impeccably dressed angel of vengeance, holding a leather portfolio that contained enough documentation to obliterate 2 lives with surgical precision. Behind Elena stood Martin Blackwood, Keisha's attorney, his presence carrying weight of legal authority that transformed the evening from family dinner into criminal proceeding. "Surprise number 1. Keisha announced, her voice maintaining the pleasant tone of someone discussing weather rather than delivering death sentences, "concerns this beautiful house that Patricia has decided to make her permanent residence." She opened the portfolio with deliberate ceremony, extracting documents that rustled like wings of approaching doom. "Patricia, darling, there's something crucial you should understand about this house you're planning to inhabit forever. I own it. Completely, solely, irrevocably." The silence that followed was so absolute that the soft hiss of champagne bubbles seemed thunderous. Patricia's face underwent a fascinating progression of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror of someone who'd just realized they'd been playing a game without understanding the rules. "2 years ago," Keisha continued, her voice never losing its conversational warmth, "Liam transferred the deed to my name for tax optimization purposes, something about asset protection and estate planning. He was so focused on his business ventures that he forgot what he was signing. I didn't." She held up the deed, notarized and legally binding, her signature elegant and final. "Every marble floor you've walked across, every crystal chandelier you've admired, every silk curtain you've hidden behind while conducting your affair, all mine, legally, completely, permanently mine." Liam's face had gone ashen, his wine glass trembling in his hand as the magnitude of his mistake became clear. In his eagerness to protect their assets from potential litigation, he'd unknowingly handed his wife the ultimate weapon against his betrayal. "But surely," Patricia said, her voice cracking with desperation, "surely that's just a technicality. Married couples share property, they—" "Surprise number 2, Keisha interrupted, nodding to Elena, who stepped forward with bearing of someone delivering warrants for execution. Elena Rodriguez moved with consummate professionalism, placing boxes of documentation on the dining table with precision of someone who'd orchestrated this scene many times before. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "I present comprehensive documentation of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft." The documentation spilled across white tablecloth like a river of destruction. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases, bank statements, and most damning of all, the fabricated papers that had created Robert Williams from pure imagination. "Patricia Williams," Elena continued, her voice carrying authority of someone who dealt in facts rather than feelings, whose actual name is Patricia Mitchell of Los Angeles, California. Psychology graduate, yes, but not the grieving daughter of a dying technology investor, the daughter of middle-class accountants who believe she's studying abroad in Europe. Eleanor Benjamin made a sound like a dying bird, her hand pressed to her throat in shock. Harrison's face had progressed beyond purple to a shade that suggested cardiovascular emergency, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Robert Williams never existed," Elena announced, holding up documents that proved the elaborate fiction. "No business partnerships, no dying father, no tragic backstory. Just a carefully constructed lie designed to manipulate your sympathy and gain access to your home, your husband, and your fortune." Patricia was shaking now, her carefully applied makeup beginning to run as tears, genuine ones this time, started flowing down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she whispered, reaching for Liam's hand, only to have him pull away as if she'd become radioactive. "I love him. This wasn't supposed to be about money, it was about exactly what it's always been about," Keisha interrupted, her voice cutting through Patricia's protests like a scalpel through tissue. "Economic predation disguised as romance. You've done this before, haven't you, Patricia? The real estate mogul in Beverly Hills, the hedge fund manager in Connecticut, the venture capitalist in Seattle. You have quite an impressive resume of destroyed marriages. Maya leaned back in her chair with satisfied expression of someone watching justice delivered with mathematical precision. "Holy shit," she breathed, her voice carrying admiration for her sister's tactical brilliance. "You magnificent, terrifying woman. How long have you known?" "Months," Keisha replied, never taking her eyes off Patricia's disintegrating composure. "Months of watching you both perform your little drama while I documented every lie, every deception, every moment of calculated cruelty. But it was the final revelation that truly shattered what remained of Liam's world." Martin Blackwood stepped forward with bearing of someone who specialized in delivering legal death sentences to wealthy men who thought money could protect them from consequences. "Mr. Benjamin," he said, his voice carrying formal tone that transformed family dinner into courtroom proceeding, "you have been using company funds to finance personal expenses, specifically your extramarital affair. Hotel stays billed as business travel, restaurant charges listed as client entertainment, jewelry purchases categorized as employee incentives. This constitutes embezzlement, tax fraud, and corporate malfeasance." Liam's wineglass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against marble in an explosion of crystal and dark red wine that looked like spilled blood. "Keisha," he whispered, his voice carrying desperation of someone who'd just realized they were drowning. "Please, we can work this out. We can nothing," Keisha replied, her voice carrying finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. "You made your choice when you decided to study my marriage like a business acquisition, when you invited a professional con artist into our home, when you chose to humiliate me before the people who matter most." She turned to Patricia, who was now openly sobbing, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like wet cardboard. "And you, my dear, have exactly 1 hour to pack your belongings and leave my house. Attempt to take anything that doesn't belong to you, and I'll have you arrested for theft." "But where will I go?" Patricia wailed, the sophisticated psychology graduate reduced to a desperate child facing consequences for the first time in her adult life. "I don't have anywhere to—" "That's not my problem," Keisha replied with cheerful indifference of someone discussing the weather. "You should have considered housing arrangements before you decided to destroy someone else's marriage for profit." The dominoes continued falling with precision of an expertly executed demolition. FBI agents, summoned by Martin's phone call, appeared at the front door with warrants for Liam's arrest. Asset freezes were implemented with efficiency that only federal law enforcement could provide. Social destruction followed legal destruction, as Eleanor Benjamin called her closest friends to ensure that both Liam and Patricia would be persona non grata in Manhattan society within the hour. Patricia's exit was as pathetic as her entrance had been dramatic. She stumbled from the house with a single suitcase, her designer dress wrinkled and her makeup destroyed, climbing into a taxi that would take her back to whatever anonymous existence she'd crawled out of. Liam's departure was more complicated, involving handcuffs and federal agents and the kind of perp walk that would make tomorrow's newspapers. As they led him away, he turned back to Keisha with desperation of someone who'd finally understood what he'd lost. "I loved you," he said, his voice breaking with what might have been genuine emotion. "I know you don't believe it now, but I did love you." "I know," Keisha replied, her voice gentle for the first time that evening. "But love without respect is just beautiful cruelty, and I've had enough of beautiful things that hurt me." 6 months later, Keisha stood on her rooftop terrace as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her of victory and freedom in equal measure. The penthouse was hers, the gallery was thriving, and her reputation had transformed from that of betrayed wife to strategic genius who turned personal destruction into public triumph. The city spread out below her like a conquered kingdom, full of possibilities she was finally free to explore. Tomorrow, she would return to Goldman Sachs with an offer they couldn't refuse, her skills sharpened by combat and her confidence tempered by survival. Patricia Mitchell had been deported to Los Angeles, where she faced fraud charges and a reputation that would follow her for the rest of her life. Liam was serving 18 months in federal prison, his business empire dissolved and his name synonymous with the kind of stupidity that money couldn't cure. As for Keisha Benjamin, she'd learned that fairy tales were just stories people told themselves to avoid the beautiful truth, that the most powerful magic was the kind you created yourself, and the only prince worth having was the one who saw your strength as something to celebrate rather than something to conquer. The city never slept, but Keisha Benjamin slept the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who'd faced the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged not just intact, but stronger than she'd ever been before. She'd discovered that revenge wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about building a life so magnificent that their absence became irrelevant. And that, she thought, as Manhattan glittered beneath her feet like scattered diamonds, was the most beautiful ending of all.